You're forcing yourself on me. Keep shouting. Keep shouting. Somebody help! Help me! Ren Ruyi has gone mad! They're all drugged unconscious too. They can't help you. You can shout until your throat's sore. It's useless. Listen to me. Calm down, listen to me. This woman here wants to have a baby, and she's just decided that he's the man for the job. And it must be her lucky day, she thinks, because he and his men just so happen to have all been drugged by someone else, and now they all can't move their bodies anymore. So then, why should she bother wasting all that time and effort trying to convince him to sleep with her anymore? She could just force him to give her what she wants. Right? Does this scene sound like horror to you? Nope, because this is a romantic comedy. You can tell that this is a romance because these are the two main characters of the 2023 Chinese romance drama A Journey to Love. And you can tell that this is a comedy because funny music and silly sound effects are played all the way through this scene. In this attempted rape scene, the female lead character, Ruyi, uses various tactics on the male lead character, Yuanzhou, ranging from coaxing him by offering him extra help in exchange for the favour, to dismissing his arguments as to why he doesn't want to sleep with her, to telling him to be obedient like an animal and it'll be over. After all, she simply wants him to donate some sperm. He doesn't actually have to raise the child with her. To gaslighting him that he's actually been the one who's been seducing her from the second that they met, and thus implying that he brought this all onto himself, really. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter what Yuanzhou decides to say in this situation, because Ruyi's the one with all the power. Like, he's literally paralysed. What can he even do to try and protect himself as she starts stripping his clothes off? Spoiler warning ahead. There is a tendency in media to downplay the sexual assault and rape of men by women through comedy. I highly recommend checking out Pop Culture Detective's video on this subject if you haven't already. Sadly, this wasn't the only scene like this in this drama. While in this first scene, our female lead, Ruyi, wasn't the one to drug our male lead, Yuanzhou, and his men, she will later try to poison him, as well as threaten to poison all of his men in an attempt to force him to do what she wants. In this scene, where Ruyi uses a poison which forces Yuanzhou to experience excruciating pain, fortunately his friend Shisan arrives just in time to help him get rid of the poison from his body. Shisan then goes on to explain that the reason he even knows how to remove this poison in the first place is because two women who were obsessed with him in the past did the exact same thing to him as well. You know what this reminds me of? The culture of drink spiking and date drugs. In the universe of this drama, women disregarding the consent of men seems to be somewhat of a running theme. Not only that, our side character here, Shisan, explains all of this in an apologetic way to Ruyi, as though his past of getting poisoned was simply some sort of inconvenience. While it's sadly true that victims of all types of non-consensual behaviour often diminish what happens to them as a coping mechanism, unfortunately this drama does not present this scene from that light. I say this because funny background music is played throughout this scene, plus the fact that Shisan's feelings on this subject are never addressed again in the rest of this drama. In fact, this drama goes one step further by repeatedly reinforcing how Yuanzhou not agreeing to sleep with and have a child with Ruyi is a ridiculously stupid decision. For instance, Yuanzhou's friends question his decision. And yet you weren't willing? Ning Yuanzhou, are you really a man? His friends also talk as though all of this is already a done deal. Leave the child issue to be resolved by mum and dad. It got to the point where all of the men in Yuanzhou's group started stripping and flaunting their bodies to Ruyi, expressing that even if our boss doesn't want to sleep with her, we do. And of course, every time this type of scene came up, you bet that comedic music or funny sound effects were playing in the background. All of the scenes and characters that we've just looked at have been written in such a way which, whether intentionally or not, perpetuates the devastatingly harmful belief that men can't be sexually assaulted or raped by women. That if a conventionally attractive woman wants to sleep with a man, there's absolutely no way he could possibly be the one losing out in this situation. It similarly reinforces the social pressure which men experience that not wanting to have sex somehow makes you less of a man. By choosing to repeatedly use this plotline for comedy, this drama downplays the actual trauma of these types of situations in real life. Now, I want to be entirely honest with you guys. When I first watched this drama, I laughed during this scene. Yeah, for whatever reason, it keeps surprising me how much the choice of background music can change the way that we perceive a scene. If horror music much more appropriate to this scene had been used, or even just no background music at all, then the total number of people like me who would have found this scene hilarious probably would have looked very, very different. But all of this just goes to show how sinister in its effectiveness this type of comedy which makes a joke out of rape really is. Nevertheless, if I were to be truly honest with myself, I realise that all of this comedic background music and funny sound effects wouldn't have worked in the first place had I actually just took the events of this scene seriously. And that's entirely on me. If I don't find it funny when men try to force themselves on women, then I shouldn't find it funny when women try to do the same to men. And the thing is, it's obvious that this drama wouldn't have played the same joke had this scenario been gender reversed. Later on in the drama, there's this scene where a man who's been obsessed with Ruyi drugs her before trying to force her to marry him. I know you're probably wondering why drugging people is such a recurring plotline in this drama. Anyway, this particular scene, in contrast to the first scene that we looked at, is very clearly portrayed as wrong. First of all, because sad music is played throughout this scene, and second of all, because Yuanzhou very quickly comes to Rui's rescue and beats this guy up. This is a double standard. This drama is effectively telling us that men drugging women and taking advantage of them is wrong, but women drugging men and taking advantage of them is a-okay. Interestingly, there's this scene where Shisan, as the first of a very long line of men to offer himself as an alternative for Rui to sleep with, gets criticised by our male lead for his behaviour. Yuanzhou explains that it's disrespectful for Shisan to tease our female lead, who is here to work together with them on the same mission. In this particular scene, the drama is obviously trying to get you to think, Oh, how romantic! Look at our male lead standing up for our female lead and criticizing another man for continuing to bother her after she's already rejected him. And I completely agree. I really liked this scene. It was romantic. But doesn't this scene just make you think? The people working on this drama clearly appear to understand the basic principle of no means no. But for some reason, they also seem to think that this principle only applies in the case of women saying no to men. No means no, regardless of gender. No one should ever have to justify their no with a long list of arguments, like Yuanzhou was clearly trying to do in this particular scene but failing, because Ruyi repeatedly refused to take no for an answer. Unfortunately, it's not just the story and the side characters in this drama which persistently downplays scenes like this through comedy. Yuanzhou also sadly tries to trivialize what happened to him. Eventually, Yuanzhou manages to convince Ruyi to let him go in this scene after he promises that he'll sleep with her on a later date, just not today. As the drug in his body finally wears off and he regains the ability to move and defend himself, Yuanzhou turns around and says to Ruyi, "Sorry, I'm going back on what I promised you earlier." Okay, let's just pause right there for just a second. Explain to me why Yuanzhou is apologizing to Ruyi in this scene as though he's the one in the wrong? Yuanzhou has absolutely zero obligation to keep a promise which he was forced to make under coercion. A promise which he only made because he didn't want to get raped. To add to all of that, Yuanzhou then goes on to say to Ruyi, "You're very innocent. Who knew you'd be so easy to deceive?" Now, there's quite a bit to unpack here. To start off, all this stuff about Ruyi being innocent and pointing out just how easily she fell for his lies feels like a strategy that the drama is using to try and make Ruyi appear less threatening to the audience. Like you thought she was a predator? Actually, she was just a prey caught in Yuanzhou's trap. In hindsight, maybe he was actually the one with the upper hand all along. First of all, Yuanzhou was absolutely not the one in control here. As you watch through this scene, you can tell just how desperately he tried to argue against every one of Rui's tactics, and failing each time. This is in no way the look of a man with the upper hand in this situation. But even if the drama manages to convince you that Yuanzhou did actually have this situation under his control, this still does absolutely nothing to absolve Ruyi of what she did here. The fact that Ruyi had the intention of forcing herself on Yuanzhou if he said no, plus the fact that she tried to act on those intentions, is the only thing that matters to make what she did morally wrong. Whether or not Yuanzhou had this situation under his control is entirely irrelevant. By focusing attention on the actions of the victim is what leads to dangerous thought processes like victim blaming. It's 100% her actions that we should be focusing on here, not his. All in all, it may not have been straightforward to notice at first glance, but what the drama did here, whether intentionally or not, by writing stuff like, "You're very innocent. Who knew you'd be so easy to deceive?" is incredibly manipulative. It's trying to manipulate us as the audience into thinking that what Ruyi did wasn't so bad after all. Add to that a bit of funny background music here, and social pressure for men to have sex there, and you've got yourself the perfect recipe for framing women trying to force themselves on men as completely harmless. So how did we get here? What even made me want to watch this drama in the first place? There's been a lot of praise that A Journey to Love has an exceptionally strong female lead. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to give this drama a shot. And you know what? I actually fully appreciate where everyone is coming from. There are many instances in this drama where Ru Yi demonstrates characteristics of being a strong female character. For one thing, she's extremely badass to watch in fight scenes. After all, she's only one of the best assassins in the world. Not only that, she's incredibly intelligent and is often seen solving problems both for herself as well as for other people. Ru Yi also demonstrates strength in her confidence to stand up for herself when she's wronged. For example, when the man obsessed with her first reappears in her life, Yuanzhou tries to convince Ru Yi to leave their mission out of jealousy. I really respected Ru Yi in this scene for standing up for herself and not giving in to his request. She was extremely clear with him about how she didn't appreciate the fact that he didn't trust her. And you know what? Credit to our guy Yuanzhou. The man goes away, reflects on his behaviour, and sincerely apologizes to her. I actually really enjoyed how this plotline, how this relationship conflict and resolution between them was written. But not only does our female lead use her strength to stand up for herself, she also uses her strength to protect others. Whether by risking her life to fight for everyone else on the mission, or by planning to dedicate the rest of her life to try and help the women who continue to be abused and enslaved in the same place where her parents sold her to when she was a child. All things considered, these are all amazing, exceptional examples of some of the attributes of a strong female character. Of course, by no means do you have to fulfill everything on this list to be considered to be a strong character. One is more than enough. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that having the courage to pursue someone that you like is also a strength. As you've probably already noticed, most straight romances, particularly in C-dramas, involve men pursuing women rather than the other way around, which sort of always puts women in this kind of passive position. And when men pursuing women entirely dominates what you get to see on screen, the side effect of this is that it may end up making you think that this is the only way that romantic relationships can be. In fact, this is the way that things should be. That men should always be the ones to pursue women and never the other way around. And so, when we do get to see something as simple as a woman confidently flirting with a guy on screen, I just find it so extremely refreshing and even empowering to watch. To shift from that passive position of being pursued to a more active position of confidently pursuing someone else. Now, I'm by no means trying to say that it's wrong for men to pursue women on screen. I'm not saying that at all. Unless they're being a creep, of course. What I'm trying to say is that it would honestly be real nice if we could get to see women pursuing men more often on screen. The problem, of course, in the case of this drama, is that it took what could have been a fun romantic plotline and an empowering confidence to pursue someone that you like to the point of attempted rape. Having the courage to pursue something, whether that be a relationship or a career, is extremely admirable. but doing so at the expense of others is like the total opposite of that. So, all in this drama, there were many scenes wonderfully demonstrating the characteristics of a strong female character, from multiple different female characters, in fact, and I believe that absolutely deserves its praise. But this drama as a whole unfortunately fails in its efforts to be as feminist as I think it's trying to be. What I think a lot of the issue in this drama comes down to, including its mental disconnect in thinking that consent only applies one way, is something that is quite common in the portrayal of strong female characters on screen, in that they're trying to copy from stereotypically strong male characters. In one scene, Shisan says to Ruyi that every woman is a flower, every man is a tree. This metaphor perfectly reflects the overwhelmingly common belief in society that women are inherently weaker than men. In which case, how else could you possibly be expected to go about writing a strong female character than to simply copy from the behaviours of the clearly superior, stronger half of our population, and then just pasting them onto a woman? The problem with copying and pasting without critically analysing these behaviours first is that you end up copying both the good and the bad. Copying positive depictions of men on screen, like using your physical strength to fight to protect others, as well as copying harmful behaviours like aggressively pursuing and disregarding the consent of people that you're attracted to. And you can tell that this is a literal control-copy, control-paste type of situation, because those lines that Ruyi said to Yuanzhou, the ones where she said, "Keep shouting. Keep shouting. You can shout until your throat's sore, it's useless." If you've watched a fair number of C-dramas, then you may recognise these exact lines of dialogue, word for word, from scenes of men attempting to force themselves on women in other C-dramas. Scenes which are almost always portrayed in a negative light, by the way. As we've already established, this drama seems to have some sort of double standard once things get gender reversed. It feels to me like this drama saw some men in power on screen and were like, yep, let's just copy and paste this powerful thing that they're doing here onto our female lead character to make her appear stronger. Nothing could possibly go wrong with that, without critically analysing those behaviours first and realising that being in a position of power, specifically abuse of that power, isn't the same as strength. So after this entire ordeal, you might be wondering, why then does our male lead go on to fall in love with our female lead after she literally tries to force herself on him? To answer that, we'll have to have a look at this scene where Ruyi whips Yuanzhou. Okay, no, let's just backtrack a little bit first. So remember how I mentioned briefly earlier that all of the main characters are working on the same mission together? Well, part of their assignment is to safely transport their princess from one kingdom to another kingdom as part of a diplomatic mission. During this very long journey, our cast of characters gradually get to know one another and steadily grow to build extremely strong bonds with each other, both of the platonic and the romantic type. Hence the title, A Journey to Love. Now that I've explained a bit of the background to this drama, Going back to why Yuanzhou ends up falling in love with Ru Yi. You know, our infamous whipping scene? Just prior to this scene, the princess had just been put in danger by an enemy, and Yuanzhou's men unfortunately failed in their duty to protect her in time. As Yuanzhou goes on to explain, as he's the leader in charge of this mission, it's his duty to take on part of the punishment for their failure to protect the princess. Saying that though, none of his men were exactly itching to volunteer themselves to whip their boss. It was at this point that Ru Yi offered herself to be the one to carry out Yuanzhou's punishment. I don't know about you guys, but this scene took me by complete and utter surprise. After all, what you'd normally expect from a female lead in this type of situation is to say something along the lines of, "Oh no, but I love you so much, I couldn't possibly hurt you." And here's where this particular C-drama stands out from many others that I've seen in the past. Essentially, Ru Yi and Yuanzhou have both experienced what it's like to be the leaders of two separate intelligence and assassination agencies for each of their respective kingdoms. And it's precisely this. It's because Ru Yi knows exactly what it's like to be in Yuanzhou's position, burdened with the same responsibilities, that she was able to immediately spot the deeper intention behind what he did here. As Ru Yi explains to everyone watching in this scene, Yuanzhou hopes to use his whipping to try and set an example to his men about the consequences of their failure, and to teach them to be more vigilant in enemy territory in the future. This is probably the point where I should clarify that I do not, in fact, endorse whipping as a form of punishment for anything. Unless you're into that kind of thing, of course, in which case I hope you're having a blast. Might there have been a better way for Yuanzhou to get his point across to his men, other than literally asking to get publicly whipped? Oh, absolutely. But the point that I hope to make here is that this scene left a really strong impression on me. For one thing, it completely subverts the "for your own good" trope. The one which says that I love you and therefore I must protect you at all costs, even if it's at the cost of what you actually want to do with your own life. AKA, I know what's best for you and you don't. Instead, Ru Yi intuitively understood the intentions behind Yuanzhou's actions and supported him in his decision. Through offering to whip him, an action which on the surface may look domineering and perhaps even cruel, Ru Yi is actually treating Yuanzhou as an equal, respecting him as a person with his own agency, and honouring him as a leader with the responsibility to set an example to his men. Thus, not only does this scene subvert a common misguided trope, it fantastically showcases exactly why Yuanzhou goes on to fall in love with Ru Yi. Because this is the very first time in his life that he's ever met a woman who truly understands him, who understands his unique life experiences as well as his responsibilities and struggles as the leader of a national intelligence and assassination agency. As Yuanzhou further explains in this scene, meeting someone like Ru Yi, who's equally as strong as him, is the first time in his life where he's felt what it's like to be protected by another woman. That when she's on the battlefield with him, he feels like he's allowed to make mistakes, that he's allowed to slip up, because he knows that she's always going to be there and she's always going to have his back. The point that I'm trying to make from all of this is that these two main characters have such an overwhelmingly compelling reason to fall in love. So then, just why did this drama feel the need to insert a scene like this into the mix? In order to try and have a stab at answering that question, join me as we travel back in time to years before our two main characters first met. Eventually, this all stems back to a conversation between Ru Yi and someone who she very much looks up to as both a sister and a mother figure, the Empress Zhou Jie. Specifically, the Empress said to Ru Yi during her dying moments that there's a line that you must remember. In this life, you mustn't easily fall in love with men. But you must have a child of your own. And it was in an effort to honour the dying wish of someone important to her. That's why Ru Yi was so insistent on finding someone to sleep with to try and have a child of her own. For those of you who haven't seen this drama, you might be wondering at this point, what would inspire someone to say such a thing as their dying wish? Well, you see this fire that's currently raging around them? This fire was set by the Empress's own husband to kill her. Now we can begin to appreciate why someone in her situation would want to try and warn Ru Yi about men. No, my concern here isn't with the first part of what the Empress said. You mustn't easily fall in love with men. My concern is with the second part. You must have a child of your own. It's revealed later on during the drama that the Empress wasn't simply heartbroken and betrayed by her husband, which is awful enough as it is, but by her son as well. Knowing that, surely it would have made much more sense for the Empress to have said something along the lines of, you mustn't easily fall in love with men, and you mustn't have children either. Now, the drama does try to push the idea that the Empress said this partly to try and encourage Ru Yi to leave the life of assassination behind in order so that she can live a life of normality by raising a child of her own. And this is the point where we finally get round to the fact that Ru Yi doesn't even like children. Yep. She literally says so to Yuanzhou in this scene. So, taking all of that into account, the impression that this conversation between the Empress and Ru Yi then ended up giving me is one where this drama is trying to impose a particular societal view of happiness and normality for women, aka having babies, onto a woman who doesn't necessarily view that as her personal idea of a happy and fulfilling life. Especially since, during the course of this drama, Ru Yi never actually grows to like children at any point, but nevertheless, continues to be set on having them anyways, simply because she was told to. So, if the line, you must have a child of your own, doesn't make sense for the character saying it, in terms of her personal betrayal by her own child, and it also doesn't make sense for the character hearing it, in terms of her dislike of children, then what possible purpose could this line of dialogue serve? Why, as a plot device to set up the romance between our two main characters, of course. Through none other than having one of them try to force themselves on the other. A plot device which, as we've already established, was entirely unnecessary considering the already existing, overwhelmingly compelling reason for Ru Yi and Yuanzhou to fall in love in this drama. If you've skipped to this part of the video because you're wondering, why does this woman have so much to say? Honestly, I don't blame you. Anyways, here's a summary of some of my main thoughts from this video. The Chinese drama A Journey to Love frames the act of attempted rape in a comedic way, as well as attempts to make the offender in question appear innocent, which all serves to perpetuate the extremely harmful belief in society that men can't be sexually assaulted or raped by women. No means no, regardless of gender. This drama also attempts to use a misguided way to write strong female characters by copying from stereotypically strong male characters on screen. This was, at many points, successful, and at times devastatingly unsuccessful, like in copying and pasting the way in which men have historically been shown to disregard the consent of women on screen. And finally, the two main characters of this drama have an overwhelmingly compelling reason to fall in love, one which is based upon mutual understanding, and one which has unfortunately been ruined by the impression that this drama gives, whether intentionally or not, that women trying to force themselves on men is harmless, and that women must have children in order to live a happy and normal life. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video, especially considering its heavy subject matter. And as always, remember to take care of yourselves.